Welcome back and a very hearty good morning to all of you. Well, we are still with Benedict Spinoza, and we have already covered the life and works, problem and method, the philosophy of knowledge, 3 stages of knowledge, starting point of his philosophy, and philosophy of God. That is perhaps the most important section in Spinoza, because there you have the definition of God and then attributes and modes. So we said defined substance, and then we spoke about attributes. There are God as infinite. There are infinitely many attributes in God, but then of which we know only 2, namely thought and extension. Why? Yes, that's also explained. That is the way we experience ourselves, or that is the way we are. And then we also said what is modes. We defined modes, infinite modes and particular finite modes, and we belong, the humans, animals, plants and everything belongs to the finite modes. And then the section, the philosophy of God, we concluded by talking about emanation of the world. God is the immanent principle, not the transcendent principle. That is one thing the students always should remember when you remember Benedict Spinoza. And for Descartes and for medieval and other philosophers, God is the transcendent principle, not the immanent principle. So that is why later Spinoza would say God or nature, not God and nature, God or nature. In other words, Spinoza is able to substitute one term for the other. Substitute God for nature and nature for God. So that is the emanation of the world that we have completed. And now we enter into the 4th section, namely the philosophy of God. Philosophy of God. 4.1, that is a point to be remembered: contingency and lack of finality. Contingency and lack of finality or finality. Again, this is another important point in Spinoza. Well, contingency. Yeah, the things of this world are contingent. And Spinoza in no way finds any difficulty in that. Because, yes, things are, and they come in and then they go out of, because they are finite things. The second point is finality, lack of finality. What does it mean? Yeah, there is something called the final cause. In your medieval philosophy, you studied particularly St. Thomas, Augustine and all. There are 4 causes. Clear? I'm not going to take it here. This is part of your first year. So there is the 4th cause is called the final cause. Yes. All things are moving to its final cause. Particularly, you have these 4 causes explained by Aristotle, taken up by St. Thomas, and then beautifully. Yes, which you have already studied, because it will eat up my time, take away my time. So the final cause is there. But then in Spinoza, there is no final cause. Why? This is just the way the things are. Final cause for him is a fabrication by people, human beings, because we think that everything is moving to. So that is the contingency and lack of finality, the first point. That we will explain, and then we will give the metaphysical framework, which I have already hinted in the beginning, but then in the metaphysical metaphysical framework. That we will explain after saying something more about. Yes. Spinoza's world is one of determinism. Spinoza's world is one of determinism or mechanism. The things, they are as it is. Clear? Yes. Spinoza's world is one of determinism and not a design. Design means teleological. It's not, his world is not one that of teleological. In other words, there is no purpose in the creation. They are as it is. Okay. And not a design of the world. God is the efficient and immanent cause. God is the efficient and immanent cause. There is no, God is not a transcendent or transient principle of the world, but then immanent principle. That's why I didn't say much here, because we have already seen it. God is the efficient and immanent cause, comma, not a final cause of the world. To put it in differently, there is no purpose for emanation. Absolutely, there is no purpose for emanation. The things, they go on emanating from the one absolute substance called God. And there is no purpose for it. Man thinks, T-H-I-N-K-S, man thinks that he acts with purpose. Final cause is a fabrication of man. It is man's cooking up or man's contribution. There is no purpose, and that is what is called the first point, the philosophy of world. What we have seen already. So contingency and lack of finality. Absolutely there is no teleology. The fourth cause for is ruled out here in his philosophy. And then we enter into the metaphysical framework. Now we said there are contingent beings, namely humans, plants, animals, plants and inanimate things. If so, then in the metaphysical understanding, is there a distinction at all between God and nature? God and finite things? That is a question. For that, well, Spinoza, being a mathematician, beautifully brings in two elements. Now, that is, you need to know it well. Spinoza uses the phrase God or nature. So, in other words, not God and nature, God or nature. In other words, in the first class I said, interchangeable. If you say nature, well, God is involved. If you say God, nature is implied. So, God or nature to show their identity and unity. So, in other words, there is a unity and identity between, yes, God and nature. That's why he uses the expression God or nature. The other philosophers don't use God or nature, but they use God and nature. That you have seen it already. Okay. This is the infinite substance. What is the infinite substance? God or nature. Not God and nature. Don't get confused. Again, I remind you. So, this is the infinite substance which possesses infinite number of attributes, of which we know only two, explained beautifully well in the previous classes. From these attributes are derived modes, infinite as well as finite. That is, we have seen. Spinoza distinguishes between natura, naturans, and natura, naturata. This distinction is to be borne in mind. Just to speak about infinite substance or infinite attributes and finite modes. So, he makes a distinction between natura, naturans and natura, naturata. Naturans means nature, N-A-T-U-R, nature, begetting. And naturata means nature, begotten. Now, I ask my second year philosophy students, can you conceptually think about this difference? Nature begetting and nature begotten. What is nature begetting and nature begotten? Yes, if you think about God or nature, God has infinitely many attributes, of which we know only two, namely thought and extension. God has thought, in the attribute of thought, has infinitely many modes. Again, we say here you can think of God in himself, or nature. God is thought of as nature, yes, in itself, and nature begotten. Yes, that is what we see, the tangible realities. So even when we talk about finite things, you can frame in your mind the idea of the finite things in your mind. We will come to later in idealism, you will get it clearly. To give you one example, you just look at John's Gospel chapter 1 verse 1. What is chapter 1? In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Word. Then the Word was with God. The Word was God. You see, what is that? I said, wonderful philosophy too. Excellent theology. That is what is called Johannine theology. But then there is also philosophy there. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. And now, what is John 1:14? The Word became flesh and dwelt among us in space and time. So, the word in himself, or the word in itself, and the word fatto, carne, became flesh. So you look at God in himself, God in Jesus. Can you not make a distinction? Distinction between in itself and in the tangible form. So, nature begetting and nature begotten. Just to say that, well, this is his metaphysical framework. So, a little explanation. He distinguishes between natura, naturans, nature begetting, and nature, natura, naturata, nature begotten. So, what is in idea and what is in reality? Okay. In the first comes divine substance and its attributes as cause of everything. Cause, C-A-U-S-E. Yes. Divine substance and attributes as cause of everything, and natura naturata. Yes, that is the same. In the second come the world of infinite and finite modes. The same distinction can be thought of as nature, God viewed as active and nature as passive. So, little more clarity you get. What is that? The same distinction can be thought of as nature, in bracket God, nature, in bracket God, viewed as active, and nature, in bracket God, as passive. Nature begetting and nature begotten. So that is his the so-called a conceptual distinction between nature that is in itself and nature that is begotten. Yes, when you come to idealism, well, you will understand Spinoza in a better way. But to put a little clarity only, I brought in that John chapter 1 verses 1 onwards, and then 14, the word became flesh. So in other words, yes, Jesus was in the bosom of his Father. Yes, idea in itself is becoming flesh, and then only we are able to see him. We are able to talk about him. So, yeah, that is why even letter to the Hebrews and all say, no, yes, in olden times God spoke through various means, through prophets and all that is. And then finally he spoke through his only begotten Son. So here too, nature begetting and nature begotten, that conceptual distinction. Yes, later in idealism we will deal it with thoroughly. So that is what is all about the philosophy of world. First of all, contingency. Yes, contingent means yes, things are as they are, and then there is no finality or lack of finality in his philosophy. In other words, that the emanation goes on, and the emanation has no purpose. But then when you compare it with the medieval philosophy, you say, no, yeah, there is a purpose, the realization of it. And that is what is called the final cause. And particularly Thomistic philosophy developed it further. Clear? There is a purpose in everything. And that's why the 5 proofs for God's existence. You have studied it already. I don't want to talk further. But then you need to raise your mind a stage further to understand it. So this is contingency and lack of finality. And then remember always there is no purpose. There is no teleological argument possible in his. Absolutely, there is no final purpose for the emanation. Don't say creation here. If you use the creation here, well, there is no meaning. That we are away from Spinoza's philosophy. Therefore, there is no purpose for emanation. Emanation goes on. Yes, that's what is. And then we enter into the 5th section, the philosophy of man. philosophy of man. The philosophy of man. Body and mind. 5.1, body and mind. Well, this was we can very well say there was a big problem in Spinoza, problem in Descartes. We know it. Descartes said, well, one is material, the other is immaterial. One is extended, the other is thought, and all that is. And then he developed the notion, these two notions in such a way that, well, there was no gap there was no way of bringing them together. That is the problem. And so then the question arises, it is a metaphysical problem. And so for a metaphysical problem, he proposed an ontological, epistemological solution. Then he said, yes, both of them, yes, interact in the pineal gland. So came interactionism. But here in Spinoza, there is no such problem. Both are one and the same reality expressed in two ways. Because there is only one substance in Spinoza. So that's the point. So this was a great headache to body-mind relationship, was a great headache for Descartes. But for Spinoza, it caused no problem. Clear? So that is the point. Accordingly, Spinoza, there is only one substance, both bodily and mental. One substance, because God is only one. God has infinitely many attributes, of which we know only two, namely thought and extension. So one reality is expressed in two ways. That is the point. Mind and body are the one same reality expressed in two different ways. You can write down it. So slowly I will go. There is only one substance, and then both bodily and mental. Mind and body are the one and the same reality expressed in two different ways. Now, how are they expressed? That is what I am going to tell you. Listen carefully. What is expressed in a corporeal way? What is expressed in a corporeal, bodily, clear? What is expressed in a corporeal way under the attribute of extension? Yes. What is expressed in a corporeal way under the attribute of, yes, attribute of extension, yes, is given a mental expression, is given a mental expression, yes, a mental expression under the attribute of thought. Yes. So, in other words, whatever is expressed in extension and in thought are one and the same reality of the substance. So, whatever is expressed in corporeal way under the attribute of extension is same as whatever is expressed in a mental way under the attribute of thought, because thought and extension are the attributes. God has infinitely many attributes, but of which we know only two attributes, because That is the way we exist here on earth. So, substance is understood with the help of attributes. Now, what are the attributes? Thought and extension. Thought and extension are the two ways we come to know the substance. Now, these are not two realities, but one reality expressed in two ways. Therefore, whatever happens in the body happens in the mind. Whatever happens in the mind happens also in the body. Therefore, his solution to the body-mind problem is called psychophysical parallelism. Psychophysical parallelism. There is no interaction. Interaction is in Descartes. So, whatever happens in the body happens also in the mind. Whatever happens in the mind happens also in the body. And that is what is called psychophysical parallelism, because there is only one substance, and that substance is known through its attributes, namely extension and thought. Therefore, it is same emanation of the one substance. So that is, brothers, dear students, the distinction here in Spinoza. Very important, because that way he is different from, yes, his predecessor and successors. So that's one thing that you need to bear in mind. So what is expressed in a corporeal way under the attribute of extension is given a mental expression under the attribute of thought. To complicate the idea and to complicate the second year philosophers, one more sentence could be said, that is, human mind is the idea of human body. Human mind is the idea of human body. A body is an object in space corresponding to an idea. Just as human body has many parts, human mind has many ideas. And all that is, it goes. First, I will just read it for you. Just as human body has many parts, human mind has many ideas. There is a perfect correspondence between the order and connection of ideas and things. That is what is called psychophysical parallelism. What is that? Psychophysical parallelism can be explained with simply one sentence. That is, the same order and connection is found both in the actions of mind and body. In other words, there is a perfect correspondence between the order and connection of ideas and things. That's all. So, there is no interaction between body and mind, but correspondence between bodily and mental events. Because of the psychophysical parallelism, process of the thought coincides with those of body, all the same idea expressed in different sentences. So that is what is called body and mind relationship. And the body and mind relationship is no longer, yes, they are not different, but they are two attributes of the same substance expressed in a different way. Therefore, whatever happens in the body happens also in the mind. Whatever happens in the mind happens also in the body. Therefore, the body-mind problem is solved in Spinoza. and that theory is called psychophysical parallelism. And then we come to 5.2, intellect and will. What is intellect? Intellect and will. Yes, that also is something interesting in Spinoza. In so far as the mind knows the ideas, in so far as the mind knows, knows the ideas. In so far as the mind knows the ideas, it is called intellect. Intellect. In so far as the mind knows the ideas, it is called intellect. In so far as it affirms or denies, affirms or denies. In so far as the mind affirms or denies, it is called will. Knowing and willing. In so far as the mind knows the ideas, it is called intellect. Capisci, have you understood? Yes, I have understood. Clear. And then, in so far as the mind affirms, yes, or denies, it is called will. That is also you need to remember. There is no distinction between knowing and willing. Hence, intellect and will are the same. Why? I mean, so far as the mind knows the ideas, it is intellect. Yes. What do you mean by knowing? Yes, I know it. When you say, you are affirming it. Yeah. Do you know him? Yes, I know him. In so far as the mind knows the ideas, it is called intellect. And in so far as it affirms or denies, it becomes will. And so there is no distinction. Why? Yes, the moment, do you know so and so? Yes, I know him. Or I do not know him. So there is no distinction between knowing and willing. Hence, intellect and will are the same. Okay. Then the last point under that is freedom. Yes, you philosophy students, tell me now, is there freedom in Spinoza? We have already given a hint. What is that? Yes, it is all determinism, we said. Clear, no? Yes, it's all determinism. Where was it? Just a little ago, I said, yes, Spinoza's world is one of determinism, mechanism, and not of design or teleological. So, what is his sense of notion of freedom? Yes, he says, well, there is passion in us and all that is. But then, so long as our ideas are turned into the direction of finite and transitory things, mind you, in so far as our desires are turned to the direction of finite and transitory things which cannot permanently satisfy, we are in a bondage to external circumstances, and are the victims of events. We are the slaves of our emotions and passions and confused ideas which owe their origin to causes outside our control. We free ourselves such bondage by thinking clearly and distinctly. So, thinking clearly and distinctly as who we are. Human freedom, according to Spinoza, is then a matter of accepting universe because you are part of the universe. That's the thing. So, human freedom, according to Spinoza, is then a matter of accepting the universe because you understand It's mathematical necessity. This one will gain peace of, once you know this, one will gain peace of mind. One is free from passions and able to return good for evil. Often man thinks he acts with freedom. Again, often man thinks that he acts with freedom, but in reality all is determined. That is why I told you. Okay, we stop here. We go into the philosophy of morality and then enter into the next topic.